weeks. It is about oaths. But of course, we haven't gotten to that material yet because it's fronted with other things. So I'm Rachel Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and A Daily Dose of Talmud. And here to steer us around the next half hour of highlights from Shavuot, the last 7 days in Shavuot, is Rabbi Elliot Goldberg, who has very kindly stepped in for a teacher who couldn't make it today. So thank you for pinch hitting today. Rabbi Goldberg, go ahead and start.
My pleasure. Thanks. It's good to see everybody. Happy to be a pinch hitter. I thought I was sitting out this game, but I got in at the last minute, so that was okay. I too am having the Shavuot, spell check problem. So I like that you called that out. It does. It has affected my writing. We'll see how long it takes for the next time. Then Shavuot is coming, and when I start to do some teaching for that, I wonder if it'll correct the reverse. But anyways, we'll see. The interesting I will note on that theme, and then I'll get to the Talmud. I'm amazed at how far like the autocorrect things have come, like the way in which particular Jewish vocabulary or even Talmudic vocabulary and other things is far more embraced by the computer checker, the artificial intelligence checkers than it was once upon a time. And the ways in which Jewish English is part of the lexicon, even on our computers. It's an amazing thing. And anyways, we started a new Masachet this week. And as Rachel said, we're going to spend a little time in the first pages on a little bit about Shavuot, about oaths, but most of the discussion of that is delayed a couple chapters. That's because at the beginning of this Masachet, the Mishnah uses a phrase which it uses a handful of times. And in the conversation in the Gemara, it's an opportunity for them to check in on all those other times as well. I'll say what I mean by that, right? The Mishnah of Shavuot starts with, when we're talking about oaths, there are two which are four. And if you have been with us since Masachet Shabbat, you'll know that you might recognize that phrase because Masachet Shabbat also begins when we're talking about what carrying of objects is not allowed. Right, the Mishnah of Shabbat starts with carrying out on Shabbat has two things which are actually four, and there are two other places where the rabbinic material is organized that way with this phrase. Things that are two categories that are really four, and the Mishnah starts. Our Mishnah actually happens to note all of them, and so the Gemara talks about all of them. It's a weird phrase, two that are four. And a weird thing about it is, while some of the patterns in the Mishnah, some of the language on it repeats and you see it in different contexts, it's the same thing over and over again. And here, in some ways, while the language is the same, we have something that has two categories that really turn out to be four categories. The way in which you get from two to four is different in each of the cases. I'll say what I mean using Shabbat as an example again. The Shabbat text begins right there. Carrying on Shabbat, there are two ways you're not allowed to carry, which are really four. The two examples that the Mishnah starts with are ways when you pass something from public property into private property. And there are two ways to do that. And then we go from two to four because the rabbis say, oh yeah, it also works in the other direction. So there's sort of this natural doubling of, the initial two cases are about ways in which you can pass an object from a public domain into a private domain. And they say, actually, it works in the reverse too. And that's how it's two categories that are really four, because we take the categories that we have and reverse them. That doesn't work the same way with the other kinds of twos that become fours. And so each of the instances of twos that become fours are its own logic, its own explanation. And the beginning pages of our Masachet, of our tractate, sort of dig into these four categories where that happens. I would like to talk a little bit today about the example that comes from Masachet Negaim, place about marks on your skin that has to do with purity and impurity. If you're following in the weekly Torah portion, right, we just read Tazria Metzora, the part of the Bible that talks about all kinds of marks that you can get on your skin, and how the priests who served in some sort of medical and purity capacity would look at these marks and determine if they were pure or impure. Certain marks made you impure, you had to leave the camp. Certain marks made you go into a holding place. You have to quarantine a little bit to see would they grow or change or not. And certain marks were just marks and not signs of impurity. And the priests were experts in that. So if you've been following Parshat Shavua, you might be familiar with the biblical material a little bit. But I want to look at the Mishnah. That's the two categories of marks that turn into four. Not because I really want to dig in there about the categories. Where we're going to get to, here's a little foreshadowing, so you know where we're going, is the conversation in the Gemara about these categories gives us an insight into how the rabbis see the geopolitical world that they live in. And I want to get to that geopolitical comment that they make and talk about it a little bit. But the journey there has to go through these categories a little bit. So if you're used to studying Talmud, it's 4 steps from the Mishnah to maybe geopolitics. We're going to go through those steps, but know that it's the point at the end where we're headed. If you're interested in a deeper treatment of these 4 categories and the conversation in the Gemara that I'm touching at, the Daily Dose of Talmud, if you get the email that was written yesterday, digs into this text as well, and does a great job at going deeper into some of the places I'm going to do quicker. So I refer you back to that if you're interested more in that piece about the marks. All right, so that's by way of introduction. I'm going to share my screen. My texts today are all in right from Safaria, so I don't have slides to share with you. I know some of you really like the slides. Sorry about that. It's with the pinch hitting, I had time to prepare, but not to prepare the slides. I hope you'll forgive me. Here we go. So I'm bringing the Mishnah here that's quote about the 2 categories of skin marks that are really 4. It's quoted in our Masachet, in our tractate in the Talmud. I thought that my colleague Josh Kolb's translation of this text from the Mishnah of Negaim would be easier for us to look at. So I went to the text from the Mishnah, but it's quoted in our Gemara as well. This gives you a sense of the categories and will help lay out what the Gemara is talking about. So here we go. The signs of Negaim are 2, which in fact are 4. Right, that's the linguistic pattern that's right starts our Masachet, 2 which are 4. So one of the 2, the bright spot, right, Baheret is the Hebrew, is bright white like snow. Secondary to it is a sign as white as the lime of the temple. So this gives you one of the 2, and the second add-on, right, the first add-on that makes it, right, I guess the 3rd category. They're saying one kind of thing that can appear on your skin that we have to check is a baheret, some sort of spot. Just would say the Torah uses these terms, doesn't come with pictures. So there's a lot of speculation about what this could look like. And that's a whole different rabbit hole to go down. So we're just going to go with spots of different shades of white. So the main category is a bright white like snow. I think it's interesting here that snow does appear here and there in the Mishnah, and there's snow from time to time in and around Israel, but it's not as common as some of the places that I'm seeing from those who came on this Zoom and put in the chat where you're from. We're more used to snow than the rabbis were, but I like that they use the color of snow as an analogy. It's one of their whites. And the connected secondary category is like the white of the lime of the temple. Took me a minute. I don't know if this happened to you. The first time I read it, I'm like, wait, isn't lime a green color? But it's not that kind of lime, the fruit, right? It's the lime that you use in the walls, which is white. I could shift from the green to the white. So there are 2 shades of white. One is a primary category, one is a secondary category. The second kind of mark is a se'et. the rising, it's Josh Culp translated here, is as white as the skin of an egg. And the secondary white is a white like wool. This is what Rabbi Meir said, and the sages disagree, and they say the sage is a white wool, and the secondary category is the white of the skin of an egg. Those same two shades of white, they just reverse which is the primary color and which is the secondary color. If you're like me and not so sensitive to shades of colors, you might be thinking like, well, what are all these whites? I think very much about, I was thinking about as I read this, when we were painting my daughter's room, a shade of blue, not white, and we went to look at the paint samples, and there was that booklet, right? You fan it out, and you see there's it's not really a million, but a dozen different cards of blues, each with like 7 shades of blue on it that are all somehow related, and each somehow technically a different blue. I looked at it and saw lots of different blues, but people I talked to about choosing the color of the room, other family members were like, oh no, this family of blues is a whole different blue from that family of blues. And here we're seeing that with the whites here and the different signs. So we have these categories, 2 major categories, 2 minor categories that come with it, and the Mishnah lays out what they are. Now, the conversation in the Talmud about this has to do with how distinct are these categories. And Rabbi Akiva says, I missed a point before that. The conversation in the Gemara talks about these categories, but it has to do with the additive nature of them. Meaning, if you've ever had like a spot on your arm that you're looking at to say like, oh, what's going on here? They're not always uniform in color, and sometimes they're different shades, right? The other day, my daughter had a bruise on her leg. She came to, say, Dad, I got this bruise. It's not healing. And we had to check out like, are the bruise colors going towards like healing or going towards like something more is wrong? But we had to look at the different shades and see like, the question is like, how big is the bruise and how big is it going? And so the question was, do you add the yellow healing sort of color to the purple bruise color and make it one big bruise? Or is it the bruise really the small piece? I think that's analogous to what the rabbis start to talk about. But when you have some mark on your skin with 2 of these shades of white, does the area that the mark on your skin takes up add up do the 2 different colors add together to make a mark that's significant, right? There's a minimum size of the mark, the size of a small bean, that any mark that's smaller than the size of this small bean, you don't have to worry about, and there's not a question of impurity. But once you get past a certain size, it's something significant. And the rabbis look at these different categories and say, which of these shades of white add together to make a significant mark that you have to treat, and which don't? Now, Rabbi Akiva comes to say all 4 of these categories, the 2 major ones and the 2 minor ones, whether it's snow or wool or lime or egg, any of those colors can add together. All 4 categories can be joined together. So if you have any 2 or more of these colors on your skin, they can add up into one big mark, which might be significant. And the rabbis hold that each major category has a minor category with it, and those are separate. So when we start with the Baheret, which is like white, light, snow, and the secondary sign is the lime of the temple, those 2 colors can add to make a bigger mark. But if there's a mixing in of a color from the wool or egg, it doesn't add to the total. It's a separate mark and considered separate. So you could have 2 small marks of 2 colors each that are not big enough to be significant, according to the rabbis, that for Rabbi Akiva would say, no, all 4 of those colors add together to become a mark. And the conversation, some in the Gemara that we're going to turn to right now, I'm going to switch screens as I do that, is about how do we understand these categories? And this is where the rabbis introduce a geopolitical analogy that is really where I want to get to today. So here's the beginning of that conversation. I'm going to note a few things about it. Rabbi Hanina comes to try to explain the piece of the rabbis that says these 4 categories are really 2 separate ones, right? There are 4 categories, but in 2 different columns. Just want to note Rabbi Hanina, by the fact that he's named Rabbi and not Rav, that's a sign that he's coming from the land of Israel. And I'm noting that because I think in this conversation, the Babylonian Talmud has weaved together some sources from the land of Israel with some sources from Babylonia, which happens a lot in the Talmud. But I think it matters a little bit to where we're going to get to in the end. So Rabbi Hanina says, here's what he says to explain the analogy of the rabbis. He says, here's how this works. What's this compare to? What does this matter comparable? What are these categories like? It's like two kings and two governors, right? Where with regard to the supremacy, the king of this governor is above the king of that governor, and the governor of this king is above the governor of that king, right? What I think this means is saying, right, we have two main categories, two kings. They're in different categories, and under each they have a governor. So there are four rulers. There are two sets of rulers, which are really four different people. But there's one king and one governor that make one column, and one king and one governor make another. Now the Gemara here isn't totally happy with this analogy and says, well, if you have two kings and one's over the other and two governors, it might be that we're saying these are four different colors that are four different categories that could merge together. It's not clear it's totally separate. And the Gemara's conversation is this a good way to explain how the rabbis separate out the four colors of white into two groups of two? Or could this analogy also be used to support Rabbi Akiva, who says all these blend together? We're making this analogy of kings and governors doesn't help us understand how the rabbi's position is different from Rabbi Akiva's position. And there's a little back and forth in the Gemara, which I'm going to skip over about the aptness of this analogy. And then the rabbis, they bring us a new analogy, a couple new analogies that to try to revise it, which brings us down, skipping over one of the analogies, to a second one, also using the category of rulers to be able to talk about how to understand these categories, maybe sharpen the analogy so that it's not open to both the possibilities that it helps the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva. So I'm skipping down here to Rava, who brings the second analogy. I just want to note what Rava, who doesn't have the name, he doesn't have rabbi in front of his name, although he was the head of a yeshiva, so he certainly had that status, even though it wasn't named. That's a different topic for a different day. But we're shifting to Babylonian rabbis having this conversation. And Rava says, well, we're not sure about those previous analogies, but here's a different way to think about it. Maybe we have two different major categories. One is King Shapur, the king of Persia, the Persian Empire, and the other is the Roman Empire. And each of them have their own subordinates. What Rava's trying to say here, instead of just saying kings and governors and making it vague, let's use some real examples from our day. And he says, let's take the two empires that that are major empires in our region. One is King Shapur, the king of Persia. Persia was the ruling empire where the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud lived. And the other empire, the Roman emperor and his subordinates, that's the empire that was ruled over the land of Israel. And certainly the rabbis in Babylonia knew of it because the Romans had a major factor in the destruction of the temple, and they were aware of all that history passed down, which we've seen lots of stories about in the Talmud. So Rava's trying to sharpen the example, but not just saying any kings and any governors. And he's saying, if we think about these categories of white, it's like saying one category is Rome, one category is Persia. They each have their own king. Each king has its own subordinate. They are separate empires. They are separate groups. They don't mix. They don't add together. They're different entities. This is how we can understand what the rabbis are talking about. All right. In true Gemara fashion, we're 2/3 of the way in, and we did the whole introduction, and now we're getting to the point I wanted to point out. I couldn't figure out a way to get here faster, but this did let us explore some of this conversation. Again, if you want to dig into these analogies a little deeper, I refer you to yesterday's Daily Dose of Talmud, which does a great job of it. In response to Rava and this analogy that he brings, Rav Papa brings a question. Which of them is greater? He asks the question. So Rava just mentioned we have these two empires, and Rav Papa asked Rava the question like, well, if you look at these two empires, which one's greater? There might be a way that this is actually asking about like the two categories of marks, the two that are four, which of the two is a greater category? It might have implications back. But as I read this question, it's sort of like an aside. Maybe it's because I come from the classroom as a teacher for many years. you're talking about political analogies to explain the different colors of the categories of white of marks on the skin, and you mentioned Rome and Persia, and Rob Papa's in class, and he raises his hand and says, "Oh, those are two big empires. Which one do you think, teacher, is like the bigger empire?" Maybe a tangent in class, right? And Rava answers the question, but maybe a little sharply. He says, "Does he eat in the forest?" And he refers in the third person to Rav Papa. He's sort of asking the class, "Where's this question coming from? Is this guy living in the woods? What does he mean by that?" He sort of spells it out with what's next. Go out and see whose coin circulates throughout the world. And he's saying, Rav Papa, you're asking this question, which empire is greater, Persia or Rome? Like what he said, what are you living with blinders? How can you not know? Are you living in the woods? Right? Do you not, read the newspaper? Do you not look at the internet? How can you not know which empire is bigger, Rome or Persia? All you have to do is go into the world, go to the market, go see the coins that are being used, and there will be a clear indicator to you which empire is greater. So I wonder, there's a little sharp critique of the student here. I wonder if it's like the instances of like when a president, makes a comment about, the price of bread or the price of milk, but hasn't been to the store in a lot of years, so it doesn't know it. Has Rav Papa been in the yeshiva too long, doesn't know about the currency, and doesn't know about how these things are spread in the world? What's interesting to me here about this comment, though, what we learn about this, about the world that the rabbis lived in, which we do, right? There are ways in which we know the Talmud is not. It's a book of law. It's a book of folklore. It's a book of stories. It's not directly a book of history, but we can glean some social history sometimes from stories like this. What do we learn from this? In the marketplaces, there were lots of currencies circulating in different places, it seems. Some coins were used predominantly over others. We haven't seen, what the answer is. You might have a guess. You might have read this, so you know where it's headed. But it says, like, go out into the market and see what the dominant currency is. I'll give you a hint to what the answer is, right? They're going to bring a proof text. They're not going to bring a text from a merchant, but they're going to bring a text from Daniel. And Daniel's talking about a future vision of the world. And he says, "It shall devour the whole earth and tread upon it and break it into pieces." It's a quote talking about future powers of the world. And Rabbi Yochanan says, this is the guiltiness of the Empire of Rome, being the devourer of the world, whose coin circulates throughout the entire world. So Rabbi Yochanan comes and tells us here that the currency that's the dominant currency is the Roman currency. It circulates throughout the world. It's used everywhere. And that's the major culture. So the answer to Rav Papa's question, who's greater, Rome or Persia? The answer here is Rome, both based on this midrash and based on what Rava suggests you could see in the marketplace. I think it's interesting. So I just want to note, Rava and Rav Papa are Babylonian rabbis. Rabbi Yochanan is from Israel. So it's possible that it's probable, I think, that Rabbi Yochanan's comment is about this verse, which was imported in to this conversation about the empires of the world, not imported in because it has anything to do with the conversation that Rava and Rav Papa were having about marks. If they quoted the verse and they quoted the interpretation of the verse, it's really about empire. So I wouldn't say that Rabbi Yochanan's commenting on the whole sugya, the whole Gemara before, but he's just making this comment about Rome and its coins. What do we learn about this, though? Here it's in the Babylonian Talmud that's reporting it. It seems to me that in part this text is saying, even in the Persian Empire, even in Babylonia, where the Roman Empire once, but at this point no longer held sway, their coin was still dominant, and the impact of Rome spread out. And there was awareness of the rabbis, except for Rav Papa, who wasn't so sure, was asking, in Babylonia about the impact of Rome, even though they lived under a different empire. And that these global empires and what was going on in the world, the rabbis were aware of enough to use the analogies about these different empires to talk about a very particular Jewish legal concept that didn't have a parallel in the societies in which they lived. That came from the Torah about marks in the skin. What analogy are they using in the Beit Midrash or in the Talmud to try to explain these categories of skin? They're using geopolitical empires and economy. And that's their analogy. It says they were attuned to the world, and both in terms of what was going on politically, who was in power, and economically, about noticing which coins were used and how they were used and what that meant about the world. Says something, maybe some evidence here, about the use of Roman currency still after the Roman Empire was no longer the power in Babylonia, where the Persians held sway. And we know in the world today, like countries have their own currency, but some currencies have power worldwide. I just read some articles about the U.S. dollar maybe taking some steps back in recent months in that currency because of our own political turmoil, but we'll leave that definitely for another day. But what we see here is a little glimpse into how the rabbis saw the world in which they lived and how it came into their study of Torah and of law and into the Talmudic discussions that got preserved in the text. And it's a moment that we can glean here. And if this is something that's interesting to you, it's something you could track, because it's not the only place where the reality of the Roman and Persian worlds come into the Talmud. And there's a lot to explore, not just about the laws that they're talking about, but there's a lot to explore in the Talmud about the politics of the day and the economy of the day and the social history of the day, how those all weave together, even in a conversation about marks on skin. All right. Well, I see I've left a couple minutes for questions. Sorry for going into the question time.
Yeah, that's okay. Aaron has a question about the audience for this text. He says, I'm curious, are the rabbis trying to tell experts how to diagnose the ra'at? I guess Kohanim someday, or are they trying to tell the public how to self-diagnose? What is the practical purpose of this conversation?
Yeah. I love that question, right? Right, the Torah seems to be a how-to manual. Here's what the priest is supposed to do and the steps they're supposed to take. Although the verses from the Torah about these marks sort of says how to in the timetable, but doesn't give a lot of description about the actual interpretation of a mark. So if the rabbis are just going with what's in the Torah, they're already starting from a deficit where, there's not a lot of how to. Here's something I will note. Masechet Negaim is a Masechet in the Mishnah. It's not a Masechet. It's not a tractate in the Babylonian Talmud. Meaning, here's a place where the rabbis treat it, and Negaim as a topic comes up throughout the Talmud, but it didn't have a Masechet in the Talmud in Babylonia of its own, which says to me it didn't seem to be as practical a thing, right? The Masechtot that the rabbis chose to bring into the Talmud are the ones that were more useful or practical, right? The same way, like if you look at what tractates we study these days, more people study the rules of ethics or civil law or the holidays than they do the tractates about things that are a little less relevant today. And Daf Yomi, we study it all. But as we enter the back end of the Talmud that people peek at less, we'll see less studied Masechtot. Here, Negaim didn't even make it into the Babylonian Talmud, which says to me it wasn't something that they were thinking about or doing or trying to preserve for one day when the priesthood would be restored in the temple. My sense is the conversations about Negaim are the rabbis and their intellectual interest in the full scope of things that are in the Torah and their desire to have Talmudic conversations about it. I do not think right, the priesthood in Babylonia was I do not think that the priesthood in Babylonia was inspecting people's marks. There was no way without the temple to do some of the sacrifice that removes some of these marks, and that it makes me think the audience for this is the rabbis in the Beit Midrash, more so, than the priests who would maybe be using this practically. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to this piece about Roman Persia as opposed to the marks and lesions. I know in my work as a rabbi, no one ever asked me. My work as a dad, someone asked me sometimes, there's a thing on my arm. Do I need to see a doctor? But in my work as a rabbi, no one's ever come to me and said, am I impure or not? Do I have to quarantine or not? And I think that was true for the rabbis in Babylonia as well. A purely guess on my part, but I would say I would put the odds in my favor on that. Thanks for that question, Aaron.
All right, it is about time to wrap up. So thank you all of you for coming and participating and asking good questions and learning along with us as we go. And thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for highlighting these texts for us this week. I'm wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And I'm sorry, I should have grabbed the link. Your next opportunity to learn over Zoom with us comes before next Thursday, actually, because we are having our Talmud book club on Tuesday. So we will be reading the Talmud and the internet and should be having a lively discussion with the author. I hope you will decide to join us for that. And then we will meet in this forum next Thursday as well. In the
It's a
meantime,
fun book.
everyone, and happy studying.